We've seen scientific racism in class, but this frame of mind isn't limited to discrimination by race. Pseudoscience perpetuates harmful ideologies and myths regarding other observable human traits as well. Science is socially constructed. Our cultural context always influences the questions we ask and the conclusions we draw, meaning the scientific method cannot be completely removed from the society in which it takes place. While we would like to think that we as a society has progressed and distanced ourselves from such movements, the fact is these themes are still prevalent in society today. Our project is going to focus on how this attitude towards science has been used to justify discrimination and inequality, both historically and in the modern day.
Historically, scholars like Carl Linnaeus and Friedrich Blumenbach classified different groups of people in subjective ways that ultimately provided the foundation for present-day race and ethnicity. Moreover, Blumenbach claimed that those born in temperate or moderate climates, like the Greeks, possessed ideal human physical features, and that these physical features made up an individual's personal or biological aesthetic. Consequently, these ideas of human beauty and personhood resulted in subdisciplines in the anthropology field designed to assess personality. Yet this type of research and subjective methodology is not entirely new. Some scholars have used pseudoscience to justify their often discriminatory and ignorant claims about other people, most notably women. In 1520, Heinrich Kramer authored Malleus Maleficarum, and in it he argued that women were more likely to practice witchcraft than men due to women's fragility and weakness both physically and mentally, which in turn made them more susceptible to demonic possession and lacking faith. Kramer's argument that women are the weaker sex or gender contributed to the persecution of women who were accused of witchcraft, and many were executed or tortured unless a confession was made. The legacy of these ideas carried into biology, where the notion took root that women were just malformed and more emotional than men. Hormones, menstruation, and alleged hysteria were all scientific arguments against the inclusion of women in politics or other careers of power.
Overall, these illogical and subjective research strategies and methods contributed to infamous social movements like eugenics, that again targeted women and their bodies more than it did men's bodies. But certainly race played a critical role in eugenics and human sterilization.
The ignition of this movement in the U.S. stems from the sudden influx of immigration from other countries into the United States and the rapid growth of American industries. The influx of many poor immigrants contributed to America's class tension. People began searching for an easy way, backed by science, to suppress the poor. Eugenics seemed simple enough. Positive eugenics aimed to improve the health and performance of the population by increasing the rate of reproduction of those with the best traits. Negative eugenics sought to limit procreation through marriage restriction, segregation, sexual sterilization, and more extremely, euthanasia. Eugenics incorrectly misapplied previously accepted theories. For example, Sir Francis Galton tweaked natural selection to apply to human civilization. He reasoned that the weak should be allowed to go extinct in human society to weed out undesirable traits. He also believed that complex human traits were controlled by single genes and therefore inherited in a predictable pattern, just like the pea color in Mendel's experiments. It's now a popular belief that societal problems were caused solely by genes, led many to ignore their actual social roots, often aggravating them further. For example, criminality and poverty were labeled as bad traits, which were inherently encoded into your genes. So instead of addressing the environmental factors encircling these conditions, often areas with higher immigrant and non-white populations, those affected were dismissed as being unfit and unworthy of better lives. Eugenics thus had a solid foundation in American culture before being instituted in Nazi Germany.
Eugenics didn't end with World War II. Science continued to construct outgroups using medical diagnoses, for example, including homosexuality as a mental illness in the DSM. The medical model outlines who is normal and who is abnormal, a value judgment.
In the medical view, deafness is an undesirable disability that should be cured. However, the cultural view de-emphasizes the idea of deafness as an illness, rather framing it as simply another way of being. Unfortunately, the medical view of deafness was prevalent for a large portion of the 20th century, instituting a power hierarchy that shaped interactions between hearing and deaf people. For example, the oralist movement prohibited deaf children from learning and communicating manually, forcing them to learn to speak orally in a way that didn't come to them naturally. This was problematic for a number of reasons. It was inefficient and caused deaf children to miss critical periods for the development of language and communication skills because it didn't acknowledge that deaf children and hearing children have different learning needs. These differences aren't inherently bad and don't suggest anything about the actual aptitude or intelligence of deaf children. For example, studies have shown that native-sounding children can have more advanced syntax than hearing children, as well as better peripheral vision due to watching the faces and hands of those they conversed with manually. Furthermore, it was damaging to deaf children because it operated under the assumption that normal is the best, and that everyone should strive to be normal. This perpetuates the idea that disabled people are in some way broken and need to be fixed.
Disability is socially constructed around the dominant group abilities rather than ability in general. This isn't limited to deafness. Many blind people show faster reading speed with Braille and even human echolocation. Science shows redistribution of abilities rather than disability, with disadvantages coming mainly from being marginalized in society.
The neurodiversity movement applies these notions to differing brain types, like autism. Psychology sets neurotypical, non-autistic minds as standard and most desirable. Autism is defined in pathological terms by deficits and weaknesses, a developmental disorder characterized by impaired social communication, repetitive and restricted behavior or interests, and often sensory abnormalities. Imagine a majority autistic society describing neurotypical people as overly preoccupied with other people, erratic and unpredictable in behavior, and lacking in focused or committed interests. On the other hand, half of all known savants have autism. Savants are disabled people with talents far exceeding neurotypicals like eidetic memory, absolute pitch, and prodigious mental math. However, if we remove neurotypicals as the baseline, one could call neurotypicals savants at social communication and predicting others' emotions compared to autistic people. Neurotypical savants are expected and cultivated in schools, while autistic savants are their exceptions, who find their abilities without systemic societal support. Education is monopolized by neurotypicals and sets expected neurotypical developmental milestones as the standard. Many autistic people do not learn speech easily in the ways neurotypicals do, and as a result many miss their critical periods and never learn to speak. Though not intentional, being marginalized in ways like this has lifelong consequences. As it stands, about 50% have intellectual impairments. Prominent autism charities like Autism Speaks aim to cure autism. Until recently, they included no autistic people in their leadership. They seek a cure to make autistic people neurotypical, or a prenatal test to prevent autistic births. The goal is a world without autistic people, rather than one that accommodates them. Pro-cure groups have published scientific hoaxes falsely linking autism to vaccines, fluoride, GMOs, pesticides, and more, making it the universal boogeyman, something to avoid.
So what can we do about this? Being aware of how science and culture interact to justify existing power hierarchies is the first step in overcoming them. If we recognize the parallels between historical and contemporary art groups, constructed through science, we can work to rearrange our society in a more equitable way and rid science of the social biases that hold it back. Imagine the gains to humanity that could come from treating different types of people as different, but not less, and helping them reach their full potential rather than forcing them to conform to an impossible norm.